appropriate when you want. Reason for that is, those are the highest priority. And for example, one of the zones is considered zone 14, and it covers everything that's the University of Houston property, the Walmart property, all that. So it's kind of hard. It's the biggest zone, but thankfully we want to have these communities. We also know that hopefully the area out west is being built. How does it have a home run? Newer zones. So that's how we're going with the growth of power. So you'll see a tally of that. What I would ask for you to do, first of all, you can walk around, grab a snack, this will be interactive. I want you to come and go through some of what these projects are. In the top right-hand corner of each one of these projects, all right, top right-hand corner shows you what the project is. Like I said, we're not going to talk about parks today because parks is already done. Parks is already completed, there's a parks master plan, we know what the list of priorities. Next list, look at and see when you get a here, will be look at what we call wastewater, right? Which was that brown water. Some will include our blue water, which is the 12 zones that I just told you. Gray water, which is our drainage. Now, some of the projects that are coming up, we started talking about vision. We were friends on before we was on here, if we speak out, there's $50 million has been allocated. Okay. The $50 million are inclusive of your waste water treatment. In addition to that, we have another project that includes your manholes and your lift stations. Those of you that don't know, the city has 21 lift stations. Quite frankly, they're all pretty much beyond repair. What do lift stations do? Best way I can explain this is lift stations help move it along. They help it flow. Right? Think of if you're playing pinball and the ball starts rolling slower and you give it a boost and it hits to make the ball go faster. That's what lift stations to keep it moving. Eventually get it to our wastewater treatment plant. Once it gets to the wastewater treatment plant, that water is been treated, and then the cycle starts over. Because I get some technicals. It's almost like point that to me.
No, but I thought the manholes had already, that was a lump of money that was. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
There, it's three separate allocations. One of them is for the wastewater plant and the lift stations.
Okay.
The other one is for all of our city manholes, which totals about $7.5 million to replace and to maintain all of our manholes because we have quite a few of them. And some of them, I'll be honest with you, the inside is still, I mean, I hate to admit this, but some of them is wood. I kind of what's going on the inside. There's a lot we need to do. The last of them, which may, who here lives in the was it Mary, what we call Mary Melody? Okay, West Lawn. Okay, I've got great news for you. There's money's been allocated to take care of the old drainage project. That's the third part of this grant. It's 1.47, and it's up here going to project list, which is great because it's fun. That we're waiting for what's called GLO clearance. Once they clear it and receive the environmental review that it needs, once that is received, the next step is for us to put that out to bid. That means that there will be a bid, hopefully, if it's able to happen, if we can wave the magic wand to get the GLO to review what we've already submitted. There will be a bid going out before the end of the year. If it's possible. I'll be honest and tell you, bids going out in December are not normally good. Because it means people don't really pay much attention. We want to be very competitive. So we might do instead of a 30 day, we might do 60 days to get really competitive bids. What that means is hopefully by the close of January, latest February, we'll be able to say, hey, we've got some really good bids here for this project, and we're going to pick a vendor. We'll come here before council and say, hey, we picked somebody for probably the February meeting. Now it's time for us to go start doing what we need to do to get this stuff done.
So Caesar, since we last met, have y'all heard from GLO about the environmental?
We heard. Go ahead, Jenny, you want to take that?
Yeah, we've they've reviewed, they preliminary reviewed the environmental, and they've given us the go ahead to go ahead and formally submit. It should be a 2-week review. Okay. But then once the 2-week review is complete, then we do what they call a public notice, sending it out to all the entities that needs to be informed from where they anyway. Yeah. And then they'll issue a AUGF, it stands for basically funding.
So we're getting closer to where
Yeah,
y'all can draw down that money.
Well,
I mean, we don't have that money.
we don't. Nobody. We will never have. Here's how it works. Once we clear a certain stage so far, that we clear this part, and GLO says, okay, you're clear. They tell us whatever the allotment is for that. We literally have 5 days to get that to whoever the vendor is that's doing that service. So let's say, for example, it's engineering, right? We cleared it, that work gets approved. We receive funding for it, and we literally, for the same, to the penny, same amount. We write it out and it goes directly to that vendor for that. Everything is
Very
pre-approved.
specific with grant.
Very, very good. We have 5, if we don't get it under 5 days, we can be, given a penalty.
So who's overseeing that grant to make sure that those 5 days are?
It is a combination of a lot of it. So when it comes out, we all kind of stop what we're doing and say, hey, wait a minute, hopefully it doesn't come on a weekend or holiday or whatever. But we all get notified. Our finance department knows that when that happens, stop everything. And we gotta get that.
So Susie Q is part of it.
Susie's team is part of it. Our engineering is part of it. Our public works is a part of it. The GLOs themselves are part of it. Our grant administrators, everybody involved knows, hey, what do you need for me to get this done? What has to happen? Best part about it is, since we've done it a couple of times now, we kind of know the drill. So we're ready for it before it gets done.
Good.
And right now,
I would hate for that to happen.
Right now, we're
Because you're
averaging
gonna have a
like-
lot of upset citizens.
we're averaging 2 days. I think the only time we've gone one day, time we did it in 1 day, the time we did it in 3 days, but we're averaging about 2 days.
According to the grant funds. Sorry.
Yeah.
Alright.
So, what I'd like to ask for you guys to do now, so the main thing we're gonna talk about is water, right? Really, I mean, it's been clear, everyone said, take my water, take my water. Now, here's a very tough dilemma that we have faced, very tough dilemma. It has to do with, do we address water, meaning blue water, or do we address groundwater? Your neighborhood is being addressed through this other property, this grant, we can't move it any faster than this. We got the money today, we still have to go out to bid and stuff, so really not, doesn't make any sense for us to go any faster, even if we have one, right? We already have it allocated, so we have to go through the process. The problem we said is we've also identified, you see up here, other areas of drainage that are important. And it's a very, very, very tough thing to deal with, because we don't have a contract. To where we need your collective voice and reasoning to help us bring this forward to council to make a decision, but we want to make sure it's a collective approach to what we're doing. So having said that, let's say we had $4 million. We could do $4 million worth of drainage work, $4 million worth of water. How do we fix it? That's what you're tasked to do, is to help us make that decision as well. There's a tough decision to make. Now, mind you, if your specifically said, everyone that raised their hand and said they're not very melody, you're starting to count. You're going to help account for the other residents that are in these areas as well, because it's of importance. So you think, and you say, okay, well, if we take to do the drainage, that's right. We'll do the drainage, but then the water comes. So we have to wait to get it a lot of water. What if we never reach storm? If we never reach drainage?
So can we do 2 million for drainage or 2 million for water?
That's a great question to ask. That's what we need your help in doing that. And I'll be honest, this particular $4 million mid-line agreement that we have, we don't have enough time to do the thing. We're so far behind the drain. Again, even if we had the money, we're so far behind to get this done. We cannot crank this out in 2 months, which is what the deadline for that mid-line application is for this afternoon. And it's really important that everybody understands that. January 9th is that application deadline, which is for the mid, for the application. Is it our fault? Absolutely not. This is a recent process going on right now. The way that it's been kind of expedited. That puts us where we are now. We have very limited activity. The question is not, do we do water or drainage at this point? It's, if we don't do all water we're more advanced because communities have been speaking for years, that we want water. It's not drainage, but it's, if you weigh water to drainage, it's probably 75-25, 80-20%. For the most part, the public input we've gotten that. If this the will of everybody here to change that today, or anybody in the public that wants to comment from now until whenever, fine. But right now, the level we've got is water. Number 1. Everything else, number 5 or 6. Water is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yes, ma'am.
So every project that y'all have laid out on this table does not have funding. Is that what you're saying?
No, ma'am. Not true. And I'll say to that, to which one they're being.
Well,
This table, actually, they're outlined. This first project that's here is $48.9 million. That's allocated towards the wastewater plant and the lift stations. That's what this project is. It tells you detail what it is. Part of the small area, we're trying to make this as possible. We're gonna edit it more for the plan becomes fine. We're gonna slap a cover sheet on this, we're gonna put a 9 table of comment providers. This will go out to council for their review. So you have to have a change. You're looking at the beta red lines, you're not file. You're in the beta red. This next one is what's called 208 D208, which is a sewer demand. The 7.4 million. All right, and this one's got more inclusive because it's more pictures. Obviously, we couldn't put all the names.
But that has.
On the second one, isn't that downtown?
Second one is actually throughout the entire area. Sorry.
Pardon me?
You just came in, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I thought I missed you earlier. Thank you for being here. It actually encompasses pretty much the entire city. Then, is that accurate? So sewer manhole is city. You want to be there, okay, well,
Who you, sir? Who's this coming?
this one right here, this is Mr. Denho, he's our city engineer.
I'm doing good, sir.
All right, so I guess I would have to do this back and forth.
Go.
Wastewater collection line rehab project.
Yeah, we've identified half a dozen projects that, half a dozen lines. That is in 38 need, that needs priority. And there's no funding for it.
So I tell you what we'll do. I have, what's this bucket? I'm gonna put funded and unfunded. You got a pen on it?
Pens will do this some right on the table, like a sign-in sheet.
That way you'll know funded or unfunded.
Now, is this to repair the main water on the infrastructure of the city?
When you say main water, are you talking about wastewater or blue water?
Blue water, the ones we can drink.
Not yet, that's what we're gonna talk about next.
If I understood you correctly, when you say not funded, what that means is it doesn't have specifically allocated dollars for that project.
Yeah.
Not that there isn't a way to get money for grants and whatever other public funding to get there, and that's what we're trying to do is set the priority. Who do we hustle for money first?
Exactly right.
If we don't have something allocated like it's like from the West Lawn drainage, it's already out.
That is exactly right. And to kind of echo on what you're saying, it's giving us a hunting. All right, it's helping us hunt in a priority order based on actual community. So clearly, water is number one concern, but it's hard to do all the water at one time. We're talking about probably $50 million worth of projects, which we're not gonna get it done half. But there's other projects we've broken down into more bite-sized pieces as to what they are.
You can break them down into cases too.
Well, no, it is. We have 12 areas to do that. We have 12 zones that we've broken it down. We just second before you got that promise. They're all.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We're gonna go over the. So the next thing that's tied to that is, to your point, is how do we set up that list? How do we divulge that list? And then at the end of the meeting, when we get to the other parties, you get to now very well allocated how we separate $4 million. Or at least suggest. We don't have to sort of say, right? Just going before council based on the executive.
Well, that's a general overview. That's the person who's been in office for 4 to 5 years and didn't worry about it. It seems to me that the conflicting issues are, there are projects that, if they go bad, can financially and drastically affect smaller amount of people like drainage in West Lawn. If we get an ugly storm come through, we're gonna flood people's houses and have me-man while we move across the neighborhood to the local Motel 6 or whatever. On the other hand, you've got things like the wastewater treatment, which is having a hassle keeping up with the boom in the new houses and stuff on the other side of the highway, which affects so many more people. But it's probably not backing up groundwater into their bathtubs and things like that, but it's needs to be done. It might not have the crisis factor. So it's, and then there's the stuff in the middle.
So
Is that right? Okay.
that's exactly correct. And to that point, you give credence to those that have come before us, right? Somebody had to wear this all. Then and whoever else is here prior to that, because then is probably the only working person on some of these projects. They identified this need and they did petition to put in some grant applications to GLO to get some of the funds. Let's be honest. it's a good problem to have. We have a program, like we're talking about $50 million to fix our wastewater treatment plant. And guess what? We have $50 million, 40 hours of change. I'm sorry. That's a good thing. Problem is we have $50 million worth of water repair, after $50 million. But the good part is, to your point, we have enough to do maybe that first phase. So we need to identify where is that first phase and how we have to go. That's what we're gonna work on that. So if I can please allow you all some time to familiarize yourself with these sheets to find out. Familiarize yourself with what the major projects are. And to your point, help us identify one side, which is the other, and narrow everything on the two. That's what the purpose of today maybe is I will prioritize those projects in that sense. We're going to continue to have this discussion, and guess what? Today's priority may not change, or it may change by the time we walk out of here, because all of a sudden, there might be another leader. Right? And it might change everything. Another thing that we discussed, my mayor, we were funded for some street work to happen at first of all, right? Well, guess what? That was one of the areas that we didn't want to play. So we're now looking back 6, 8 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, when you can tear that groundwork up, like phase 3 and so forth. It made sense for us to reallocate some funds and to push that as a number one priority because we don't want to forget. We're blessed in the fact that we're getting a bunch of sidewalks put in the city of Marque. Well, along some of those same lines, we've got the water line that we replaced. Those priorities obviously different things, but I can what do, free sidewalks that are grant funded. And then we prove it up. So in that question, those might be gray area lines. Falling, using like their terminology that things. But we also should be previously important, we have to do those work. And then we're gonna be on the hook to replace that concrete sidewalk again.
And unfortunately, upset some people because we should have been doing that.
And that's the issue. So, and that's what we stand. So the argument to that is, well, why did you do that first? Well, we didn't have one, right? And two, more importantly, we're being gifted with these funds for sidewalks, which is changed from our priority. Here's some of the things in the hard short period of the there's gonna be sidewalk that's gonna take you from 45 all the way to, I'm not gonna butcher this, so I'm sorry. From 45 all the way to 3
On Speaker,
on Main Street.
on Main Street, okay.
Okay, that's already been put aside, engineers already working on that, that's not being covered.
Before the water.
Well, that's the point. When that brought us to, when we were gifted with that funding, said, oh, wait a minute, whoa, hold on a second. Not that we don't want the sidewalk right away, but we need to do the water first. They've agreed to allow us to do that. Right?
That's another thing you have in general, the timelines you're required to do things in with how much of the street or whatever, or yards or whatever have to be torn up compared to really your priority and crisis management as opposed to if we tear it up a little bit later, we still have to tear it up a lot now because of the crisis factor, but we can do the sidewalks. If we have more time to do sidewalks, we can do later on. Unless the sidewalks have a time frame, here's your money, but you gotta have it done by now. Well, you can do that faster, then you can replace all the drainage in West Lawn, which is what I'll be thinking of, but there's tons of other stuff.
And that's exactly right. As a matter of fact, I'm glad you brought up West Palm, because we're gonna bring that one up soon. And part of it, we do this after. I don't, you guys look at the map and figure out what's what, but I want you to know that there's a unique criteria of what we're going on. And with the timeline, time and funding you already have. So, but I don't want you to change your decision. I want you to look at the things for yourself and see these projects as we look at them. And then answer your questions that you look at. We want your ultimate feedback. We want it to be very, very clear to see that. To that point, if we're talking about time, yeah, sidewalk open. Want me to talk in the microphone? I'm so sorry.
We can hear you just fine.
Sorry, I know you can, but I guess there's folks out there that may not be able to. Sorry, everybody out there. Anyway,
We haven't smiled.
should have also silenced my phone. All right, so.
We
Sorry,
need sidewalks going from 45 to Highway 30.
I'll,
Down Main, that's a dangerous, I wouldn't want to be on the sidewalk.
I'm very glad you said that. Unfortunately, the city has experienced some fatalities of folks that need to take that route for whatever reason. Funding was allocated, was requested as a result of that. And this is sad to say, but sometimes the need qualifies you more. Sadly, there's been a lot of accidents, whether it's been pedestrian, vehicular, or fatal accidents in whatever fashion. And a lot of it is possibly due because of sidewalk, lighting, whatever the case may be, which is why we're pushing those initiatives in those areas. But for example, that's from Main, on Main from State Highway, from 45 to State Highway 3. We also know about the project on Emancipation Trail that's going to take from 3 all the way from Main to Texas Ave. Right, so the major corridors of the actual city, if you look at it, on this side of the city, from Main all the way down. The other one that cuts all the way across, you've got a corridor that goes from the corner of Texas Ave and 3 all the way to Walmart. We petitioned for some funding for that. We just found out the other day that TxDOT's willing to do a portion of it. So now they're going to do from, and this hasn't even been completely publicly announced because we're waiting on the documents, but they've pretty much agreed in principle to do from 45 to Boucher, the sidewalk.
From TxDOT?
Yes.
No, they're going the entire route along 45, both sides.
No, I know, but I'm saying for the sidewalk. Rick, do you know about that project? Rick is joining us via Zoom. But from 45
Into the city.
into Boucher, part of that other bigger project we did with like reconnecting communities.
Sidewalks on Tech City side. Anyway.
Yes, that TxDOT project is 45 to Vaucher is what we've got right now.
I want to make sure I wasn't out of turn. So as these projects are prompted, we go back to the same thing. We may not be able to do the entire area or the entire zone, but we could do a portion of it, right? And that's where we are. We would do the portion that's affected by this construction, but by these gifts that we're receiving through grants to get these projects and these items taken care of. That's where we stand. And that's what a lot of these things behind us are some of these projects that we're pursuing. With the number one focus and emphasis being on water and more importantly, as y'all have mentioned, your blue water, your drinking water, your bathing water, your cooking water. That has been our primary focus. You guys have seen what our pipes look like. We've had it at plenty of meetings. If you haven't seen it, I will go grab it. It is not a pretty sight. It's the number one emphasis. As part of the study that was done back in 2016, the biggest amount of pipes that our water is running through is what's called 2-inch pipe. Okay.
Those are coming off feeders, right?
Technically,
How big are the feeders?
they range,
It should be,
should be, but they
Okay,
2-inch.
2 inches is what they are
One
now.
of the houses, I'm talking about the ones out on the main street.
So
Are these 6, 8 inch,
are the main going down the street.
2 inch?
Yeah.
Main reason why we have a lower pressure. They should be bigger. They will be bigger when we get in there and fix them.
They were built in the 50s, 60s.
Okay,
So that's why they're at that size.
so if we get to replace, I'm sure we're gonna take, cause you got your mains and you've got your feeders come on.
Right.
So.
The feeders would, the mains would be larger in size based on capacity and need. Your feeders will be more likely 2 inch depending on zones, but also be the, right, but it'll also be PVC versus what we have now. Somebody said it, I didn't.
So that's all that's done, is we've got all these great big pipes and capacity for great water pressure. Where's the source coming to us that we increase our source to feed that improved size and.
This is so, these are great, this is a great line of
So
questioning.
the trunk line is there. This the original feeders, these mains or these distribution lines are only 2 and 3 inch, some cases 4, some cases 6 inches. But for the most part, the majority of the line is between 2 and 4 inch on the older east side.
Or it's not gonna make us use more water.
No,
It's just gonna increase the water pressure, once you get that first bump and the original source. They have to fill it up and get lots of pressure.
no.
Once that's done, then it's done.
Only-
It's not like everybody's gonna suddenly use more water.
Doesn't matter how you turn your faucet, it's how much you drink.
That's what I-
So,
Better water pressure, stability throughout, pressure throughout the system and fire protection. But you can't put a hydrant on a 2 and 3 inch line. Minimum, line size is a 6 inch line.
so to that point too. So to that point also, if I could say, I'm sure everybody's driven up and down 45 and has seen that very large water tower that Texas City has and so forth. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's attributed to their growth as well and their need for added pressure. Well, I am not the scientist in this, and these gentlemen know, both Den and Rick can be better versed and entertain you for hours on this, but here's basic, the way it was explained to me in terms that I think I can explain it to everybody out there. The more high towers you have, high towers, right? The more pressure is generated through gravity, and then the more pressure that water can come in at. For example, what's the PSI that we receive water from Gulf Coast Water Authority? 85 PSI. What is the average that folks would like to have their water at their faucets?
Usually you want your distribution line to be around 50, 55.
50, 55. And what are we at now?
It's at 55 at the discharge point at the water tower. So
By the time it gets to everybody,
probably in the 35, 40 range. And 25 is the minimum.
So-
allowed by PCC.
so we said that pressure was third on our list, and this is arguably why. We know that in order for us to build a higher tower that will give us more pressure and will allow gravity to do its thing, right? We need better pipes to do that. Okay. Or you're going to be busting the pipes. So we understand now, theoretically, not only is it third on everyone's priority list, but it's third in what makes sense.
It's a trickle effect.
It is. So,
There's the fix one thing, break two more concept too. It's these law corollaries, so.
and that's what's been going on throughout this time. We as a city have been, there's a leak here, let's go fix it. And we're replacing 20, 30 feet at a time. The truth is how many feet are these projects calling for replacing total? 85,000 feet, is that correct?
Each zone, I think we're at 15,000 feet, so about 80 to 90,000.
The city's just been putting Band-Aids on.
Yes, ma'am.
The nickel diamond. you-
So you as a community and as council, as listening to what you guys have to say, you have the power and the influence to make a change in this case, to at least give us the punching, marching orders as to what we need to do first. And theoretically, that's probably what's been lacking up until this point, is a very clear and directed marching orders of what we're gonna do collectively. So we all understand it. 1, 2, we're also educating each other. Right? We're educating ourselves, educating our neighbors, let everybody know what really is going on. So we talked about the allocation, we talked about pressure and why that is, right? And we understand why we're not gonna get our pressure up until we fix our pipes. Then, when that's done, I'll be the first one to go up here and tell you, hey, we need a bigger water towers. So replace one of our 2 other water towers that need replacing ASAP. Let's put one there that's a lot higher. And then we'll be able to assess some of the pressure that we have, sir.
Mr. Garcia,
Sir,
several MUDs have been replacing their water towers due to the expense of on the pumps. We recently, within the past, 7, 8 years, replaced ours or tore it down. And went to pumps, that was over by Sagemont area where I used to live. And I was wondering if, have you looked at that? Because even when new developments are coming in, they all go by electric pump now, because there's been so much improvement, and the pump can put out a lot of pressure. And so
it is to be identified and it is to be looked at further. Yes, with new development, there should be some type of impact in that sense to take care of that. I still think that if that does occur, we're still gonna need more pressure throughout the general system. So to answer your question, that could be an option. That would allow for a combination of both, maybe.
that was another reason why we took it down, because the neighborhoods kept expanding. The MUD had to take on that responsibility. So did they do a hybrid or what they do? So we went to the one that they could get the most pressure.
I'm just wondering what the risk is, because gravity's always there and pumps break.
True, and I think it's a combination of both, right? And then, but again, even if we had, again, if money didn't matter and we had both, the biggest issue with that, whether it was pumps or a bigger tank, it's the pipes that the water's gonna run through before it gets to your phosphorus. So,
Can't sustain that pressure.
so we need to work backwards in this sense. We need to work from the end user out. So we, obviously from our connecting points to your homes, right? The connection points to your homes, because obviously every resident's responsibility. Hopefully by now, every resident does have good pipes. If you didn't, probably get a pretty high water bill. You wouldn't let us know about it. You will take care of it by now. So we gotta assume that that's taken care of. The other side of it is from the connection point all the way back to the source. And it is our firm thought thus far with the data that we have that we should work from that backwards. Hence why we've identified these 12 zones. So in the identification of these 12 zones, I would like you to familiarize yourself with these 12 zones. And the reason why the 12 zones are important is because we feel that depending on how we act with the allotment that we have with this mid-mod, we may be able to take care of at least 2 of those 12 zones, which is great. All right, one of those 12, now I'll go ahead and talk about it, happens to be the same zone that we're about to go tear up when we do your drainage soon. And that's an area of concern of importance. Why? Because it may delay your drainage issues, but it'll fix your water issues while we're in there.
Another downtown.
It won't be another situation like that. So I need everybody to understand the timeline for that. Thankfully, we do have an allotment. All right, council's already taken action. We've already selected engineers. We already selected a grant administrator to administer that. We already know what the allotment is. We know we can approximately get done with it. We know that we have that possibility. We've also got data in our survey that says, hey, we could allocate, according to the survey we put out that everybody completed, up to $1.5 million in assistance for water line repair. If you add that 4.1 with that 1 to 1.5, you might be able to get 5 to 5.25 after all the fees are paid for engineering and so forth and grant administration. You might get that many projects done. The question is, how do we pick? How do we make it equitable? How do we make it fair? How do we make it to where everybody has a voice in what we're doing? But that part is not what we're doing yet. That's going to be later on in like the afternoon or evening. What I need for all of y'all to do now, please, there's refreshments in the back. I think is somebody getting some waters or something? Can somebody grab some waters in case somebody wants some waters? If it's possible. No. You know what? It's funny you say that. You wanna know why? And my stomach's probably paid the price for it once or twice. But I'm a firm believer that I gotta put my money up where my mouth is. So when I drink out of here, I do everything possible to drink out of the tap. Why? Because I gotta be able to speak for it. If I get sick, it's my own fault as we do ship of where it's going.
I figure Fort Bolivar water didn't kill me in 12 years. Walmart water.
Walmart, in order to kill you, make you stronger. So if it's possible, then is taking a moment and put some sheets on these to state which ones are funded and which ones are not. They're separated by drainage and non-drainage. Some of these are drainage, some of these are wastewater, some of these are actually blue water. Take a moment. If we need to provide notepads, if we need notepads, whatever, so you can take those, we can provide you with some. To make sure you have the ability to answer the questions you have, get engulfed in the projects of what they are. Right, and then you're gonna ask a lot, there's even dollar values inside of some of these. So for example, in certain areas, they'll tell you what they cost. Right? It's when you add all these projects together that we need to get what we need to get.
Who's the company that came in and did the assessment on our wonderful water leaks?
That was 2016, what was that?
JB consulting.
Wow. Last one in 2016?
Yes, sir.
Oh,
There was 2
there
reports.
were worse leaks than that.
Well, in 2016, they did assessment of the entire water system.
Was completed?
So on the sheets up there, does it state how many leaks that area has had?
I have some of that data.
Wouldn't that help? I mean, shouldn't we really concentrate on the worst one?
Well, it depends. It depends on the combination of 2 things, okay? It's a combination of 1, right? The first part is we had to do a combination of both. Where there are leaks and what this study in 2016 considered priority 1 areas. Right? So there were some areas that were put
that were listed as priority one areas. Now, the reason for that, you gotta assume these engineers went in there in 2016 and did their diligence to know that, hey, this one is a critical. It hasn't busted yet, it's gonna bust very soon. Right? So that plays a big role in that, as far as what that study says. We counter that, the second layer of that is how many leaks we have per zone. Right? So each zone has a certain amount of leaks. The third thing, which we're not gonna have to worry about until the end, is what does it cost? Approximate cost, based on the inflation rate that we're receiving on material and labor, what we think it'll cost to fix each zone. And then we go from there. Because to that point, as we're out there funding for grants, or if we decide, if the community together says, you know what, we're ready to attack zone 2. We want to do a CO, we want to do a bond, we want to do whatever it may be. We're going to attack zones 2, 3, and 7, whatever the numbers end up being. Right? Or we're going to apply for state revolving funds, as we call them SRS, because we know that if we apply for state revolving funds in that zone, we may be able to get some of it relieved. Why is that important? We want free money, right? So all those play a role in that. But one thing I won't do while I'm sitting up here, I can make my recommendations. I can state you clear as day. I can say, if I were, I would recommend X, Y, and Z, but I'm not going to do it without the backing of what the community is saying. This whole thing, this whole rhetoric that goes on that we're not doing what the community wants is over. I don't want that to exist, regardless of your favorite color being blue, purple, or gray. Whether you happen to vote vote a certain way, or your religion is, what does the community want and need? And that's what we're going to go hunt for in that order. But when we do come forward and say, hey, opportunities come forward for us to go apply for this opportunity, here's what it entails. It attacks zones 2 and 3, plus it attacks something with drainage. Do you agree? We can quickly say yes, and we can move it forward. That's the point we're trying to get to. So it's no longer divisive. So it's all about what do we want collectively to move this forward.
Where is the worst zone? Is they're gonna do the worst zone? Where?
Depends on which subject.
Depends on how you look at it. If you look at it priority, if you look at it, okay, so it depends. It goes back to opportunity. It might be a portion of it, right? It might mean that we're about to replace sidewalk in a certain area. Well, that one will become more important, right? Because we don't want to do double work. But however, this zone might have a lot of what we call priority 2s versus priority 1s, but they have more leaks in that area. Right? So it's all a balancing mechanism how that comes together.
Well, as a community, we're gonna rely greatly on your input and knowledge of the multiple priorities and the multiple money issues that all go in together to decide what we can do. Because as we were just talking about, if there's a zone that has a crisis prevention issue, but they got 2 or 3 little things in addition, and you save a whole lot of money doing all of those together in that zone and get that done, instead of doing all of this one for the whole city and then do all of this one for the whole city. We're gonna need your input on that to know what it is. But for me, when I go up and look at that, I'm gonna look at what is disaster prevention, because in our neighborhood, we've had fun with disaster prevention. I know there's other neighborhoods also. So that's gonna be my first consideration, is what project prevents disasters that can happen at any time. Then I'm gonna look at which projects affect public health, like the wastewater fix. I mean, that's an issue that affects everybody, and it's a public health issue, so it's a big deal, but it's probably not a disaster in the making next time the weather changes or the highway people hit a water pipe. So that's gonna be my 2 issues, and then after that, it's what's the biggest area and the most money that affects all the other stuff. So, I mean, that's how I'm gonna look at it, but I don't know anything about it, and I'm really gonna rely on your knowledge of how they all interact together.
I appreciate you doing that. The young lady behind you had a comment or a question, and then I can address that as well. Ma'am?
There is a zone, included over there off of Londale, Garrett, and Marque.
Yes, the entire city is included in all 15 zones. There's 50, excuse me, I said 12, and I apologize. It's 15 zones that the entire city is encompassed, and every corner of the city is encompassed in some way, shape, or form. And the zones that we've separated things in are not for anything other than for water. So our blue water, not talking about drainage. But going back to your question, I have what I feel that I've already done the study on and looked at it from my perspective as to what makes sense as our first set of marching orders. But I'm gonna be very honest with you. I'd rather listen to yours first before I present mine. And the reason for that is because I'm hopeful that what I recommend, and I'll even put it in an envelope and put it on the side, because I want it to be that unbiased. We have to, we as government, we as this staff, we as this team, we have to regain public trust. We must. And the only way to do that is to march together. And that's what the basis of what we're trying to do is. Because I don't want anybody to say, because one thing was suggested that there's nothing tied to it except for what I feel that makes sense. And a combination of how many priority 1 leaks are in a certain zone with how many leaks we've got reported that we can account for, right? With our current software, because that's another thing. We weren't properly accounting for leaks before. It was just like, oh my God, there's a leak. Let's hurry up and go there. I can only tell you about the data that we have been tracking properly lately and that we're still putting together based on the notes and the things that we have from previous people, because we've had a lot of staff turnover as well. So I can share that information with you, but if I could please allow me to do that after you've looked at it, then I'll give you that, Greens, because I think we could do as little as 2 zones or 1 zone to address out of our 15 water zones that we have. And I say 12 to 15 because the last 3 zones probably don't have a whole lot of use. Right? Is that pretty much how we had to include them part of the study because they're part of the city, but the real critical ones are 1 through 12. And of those, the most critical are pretty much 1 through 8, 1 through 9. And that's what I'd like to have your feedback on. Yes, ma'am.
I have one last question.
Certainly.
Just a yes or no?
Sir.
On the 15 zones, have they been updated since 2016?
No, ma'am.
Because I know there was some work done.
No. We've allocated for some work that has been done in one of the zones, and I'll share that with you. And what we've done is we've deducted the amount of the work we've done into what the projected total would be to address that area. But to be very honest with you,
And
I'll
the
be,
synopsis is updated, the actual plan.
no, correct. We've only been updated as to what we've done. And I'll be very honest with you, from the 2016, correct me if I'm wrong, full street that we've done, it's only been 3 streets in the whole city. That's all we've been able to actually put forward. 3 streets, 3, I'd say 3.5 streets, right? 3.5, is that right?
Yeah,
Like,
what's been funded through, CDBG, every 3 years, the city get an allocation of $500,000 or so. And it goes toward the recent projects that I've seen go toward that, repairing 20 water. So that's why you get 3, 4, so it doesn't take you very far.
if it's fair to do now, and we have one more question back. If it's fair to do now, when we take a break, if anyone got to go to the restroom, refreshments, whatever, what have you, take a look at these things, and we'll come back and we'll answer what questions you may have that were prompted after that, after your initial review of the projects that we have up here. And these projects, I've got to give all the credit to our focus group that's been meeting so far. And that's how we've been able to properly identify these projects to move these things forward. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Two questions. Number one, when this project is all said and done, whatever level, we know that we have approximately a 55 to 60% water loss now. What is the final objective in terms of acceptable water loss?
Thank you. 15 to 30?
15 to 20.
Okay.
That a lot of that has to do with there's going to be small leaks that you're not going to catch, but also the city uses water to blow up to clean lines. You know, they blow up water from the hydrants and we flush water at the water plant. But it's reasonable is between 15 and 20%.
So we have a long way to go from the 60, but we are pushing towards 50, just on the things that we've done internally in house and we continue to do. Our goal is to get to 50. That's our first objective. That's our first milestone that we try to get to. Ultimate goal is 15 to 20. The reason why we're bringing you these 12 to 15 zones is because, according to the study, there is very strong belief that that's where a lot of leaks are stemming from. To piggyback to Den's point, one of the major spots that we have is one of the zones, or 2 of the zones in particular. Rick, if you can hear me, if you can confirm, there's 2 of the zones, without telling you the numbers yet, that are what we call dead ends. When they are dead ends and there's no tie into those, specifically when it's dead end lines or fire hydrants, those are the ones where we have to regularly go out there and drain them or flush them. Now, what ends up happening in that sense is we end up losing a lot of water in doing that, but we have to do it to keep the quality of water together. Someone told me a great example. You can have a glass of water, but if you don't move it, don't shake it, just let it sit in there, you know, that top coat's going to get pretty disgusting. Right. And that's essentially what ends up happening when we don't flush these lines. That's why sometimes, and we'll get the calls, hey, you know, you guys are complaining about water loss, but there's this fire hydrant out here spitting up water. We have to flush lines. Right. And that has to happen regularly, not on top of the fact that we have to inspect our hydrants regularly. Right. And the only way to do that is to make sure water is flowing correctly through them. But that's along those lines of what has to happen. One of the goals with these projects is to try to tie in some of those lines so the water can flow continuously. So then not only will be less labor that we'd have to physically go out there and do it, but also be less loss because we won't have to do that. Yes, sir.
Follow up to your answer there. In the process of replacing the water line, and I will call our original settlement of Marque, in the original settlement, is there envisioned the addition of additional fire hydrants to meet our code?
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem. In the areas that are deficient, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, part of this plan that we've incorporated, not just to replace the 2-inch lines, is to allow for adequate fire hydrants in the correct locations.
Thank you.
So that's the main, that's the safety component of it.
Yeah, well, some of this work should have been done because there's several big hydrants where I live and it's scary.
Yes, sir. I agree with you. That's
It covers our whole neighborhood. There's not any work in it. I even had the fire marshal out there and a fireman test. Scary.
Well, that creates the urgency, right? Sorry.
Yeah, this is a follow-up. I recall there was some discussion after Hurricane Harvey, when our water system was overwhelmed by the Harvey water, right? And Jim, you may remember this, but I'm still not too clear. If we have new water lines, right, PVC lines, are we reducing the impact that future floodwaters may have on contaminating our water system?
So with the older lines are asbestos cement line, and they're more brittle, prone to cracking. So there's potential for infiltration into those lines. PVC lines are typically not, they're pretty flexible, not flexible, but they're hard, but they're flexible, and they're rated much higher as far as pressure is concerned. The typical pressure rating for a C900 water line is 200 psi, whereas the old asbestos cement pipes are in the 75 to 90 psi range. So that's what from what Caesar mentioned earlier. Even if we get better pressure, we're going to blow those old lines.
So what's the life expectancy on the PVC compared to the asbestos and cement?
You know, PVC lines, you know, they were introduced in the 70s, and really you don't get a lot of problems with them. The typical areas where you have failures is where there's leaks, where the connections are. Whereas asbestos cements, they're more brittle. Brittle lines tend to crack movement, and that's what you see a lot along TxDOT when they have heavy machinery or they're moving dirt. That's where the failures are. Whereas PVC line, if there's some surcharge loading, they'll bend a little bit or flex a little bit. It won't crack.
How big are those lines that they're going on?
I'm sorry?
How big are those lines? Is it like the 4 or 6 inch lines or those? I know they're not.
The trunk
They're
lines
not 2-inch.
Yeah, the trunk lines are minimum 8.
Okay.
We rarely put 6-inch lines in unless it's at a end of a line or a small area where you're trying to be serving. but
Okay.
for the most part, they're eight and up. Your distribution line has to be a minimum of eight and up.
Didn't they do that to our line one time? They put, we got a 10-inch line. What was that? And they put an 8-inch line down the middle of it. So they didn't have to dig up anything. Is that what it is?
That's what's called lining. So what ends up happening is it's lined.
They do that more often with sewer line, with
They did
the
with sewer line.
pipe work. They'll run the sewer, like the new PVC line, and they'll, at the same time, they'll pound and break those old clay pipe, sewer clay pipe. Shatter them and install the new line in place of the old line. Depending on where you are, 8-inch line is more, has a lot of capacity. Just depends on where you're located.
That's what they did on our neighborhood. Jersey and the flooding zone.
It's very common, the city uses that technique quite a bit, and it's used for rehabs, because it's less invasive. If not, they're tearing out your front lawn and all that good stuff.
Are there any questions before you have time to see what we have? Because I want to allow for enough time for us to get your questions answered and then to do the fun part, which is to allocate some money, hopefully to some of these projects. And when we say allocation, you're recommending for allocation, this is what we would take to council for review on the 14th. I want to also acknowledge that although it's not his time, Mr. Pat, if you could just acknowledge that you're here. This gentleman is our grant administrator for the MITMOD. He'll be leading the 6 o'clock discussion, which where we get to allocate some money. Before then, let's help prioritize where we are with these. I'll grab my notes real quick, and then I'll get to see what you recommend based on what we kind of recommend and see kind of interestingly how we are. Ready, good? Bathroom, everybody knows where the restroom is. There's some snacks in the back. Ready? Break.
Is this in any particular order? Does it-
No, you'll see.
I'll start here.
Careful with this cord here.
Between the large leaks.
Red dots.
The red dots.
You'll notice that some of them say funded and not funded. You'll notice that one color says funded and most of them are not funded. We're gonna start to attack, okay?
No.
I look like that.
You haven't done the studies since.
It could be a blank building, we kind of show you, it's in context, to show everything in the city, our area, and then we find discipline, so the stormwater, the freshwater, whatever, the things in the parks, and then also the things in
So these are the wastewater projects. This is the water projects, and they're different type of water projects, but this is the transmission line. Which are the distribution line repair. This is the 2-inch water line. That was-
2 inches all towards the correct?
No, these are all, the 2-inch, it's a 2-inch replacement. We're going from 2 inch, just 6 and 8. These are under main distribution line. And this
That's
is,
what I'm trying to figure out. Is how big is the main?
that's the
because-
base size.
It's just 2 inch throughout the whole city, right?
2, 4, no, in these neighborhoods.
Okay, going down the middle of my street.
So let's say this, in the subdivision, you have your main trunk line on the outside, right? And then those feeder streets, other streets that's connected. They're between 2 and 4 inch.
Well, I know down through my easements.
Yeah.
Coming off the road,
Yes, sir.
that I know that you.
Yes. Yes.
So here's the road,
Yes,
here's the 2 inch. How big is this pipe right here in the road?
usually those are between 4 and 6 inches. Yeah, which is not adequate.
No.
Yeah, but that's what, yeah, so attached to that, there's some supporting document that shows
I'm sorry.
Shows where all those.
Look, I have very.
Yeah, these are what the state.
There you go.
Up north.
Okay.
There's a 900 acre campus out there. Where I used to go to. You have to be pretty smart.
Figure I can blow up the photo easier than I can go like this at the
Yeah.
table.
Big, very, first one we got. Because. water was small.
And that's what you.
So you have shirt, shirt on.
Yeah.
Part of the campus. What's that?
Yeah. Well, it should be, if all your gate valves are installed in the correct location and if it's operating, that's not an issue. If you don't have it, then you can't isolate it and you can't repair it.
Well, that's why I've seen driving down one of the roads one day, I watched one of the. I think it was one of the. It was underneath the sidewalk.
That means that they don't have. They don't specifically already have.
Oh.
This is that project. But if they get money.
So these lines are the transmission, lines.
Projects
These
from
are
different grants and
stabilized,
Okay, so
stabilized system. Because
to turn on.
we have
those
two
things.
connections, one on each side of the feeders, one on each
So
side.
they don't already have the money officially assigned to this specific project that doesn't mean you can't get the money. You don't have it in the bank. It's not.
These projects are identified in the planning study. Basically connect the two systems together so they're on a single plane.
Right.
And to stabilize, so if one goes out or one's in trouble, then the other comes back easy.
it's also like our electrical. We were able to.
It's electrical, you need back the.
Yeah, but now, because this is like changing the
Oh, no.
opportunity. And when we would lose part of the campus out there, we could find the shore. and isolate it. Because normally they have to not count it, because the short on campus generally not.
It works the same way.
They move water. Exactly.
With water.
And our planners out there says, I have no idea what that valve turned.
Yeah.
And so they turn it off.
Yeah. That, yeah. Like to.
I can't. But now, I'm just kind of curious.
Some of these are being funded through. Like I said, the new homes that they built, their farm, we work with their part.
Well, I live in the old Pleasant. And the boys had to come out one to me on Eastern. And 16 to 22 when you hear
Yes.
that the huge one is not going to be the same. So it's actually going to be.
I can't identify everybody that brought goodies, but thank you, those of you that did. I know, Mr. Vine was one of them, so thank you to her and to anybody else that I know probably. Who's that? Ms. Vasquez, thank you so much for the goodies. There's some bottled water in the back. If we need more, we have some more. Just let us know. Please make yourself at home and comfortable so we can move these things forward. Thank you. We're gonna, and while Mr. Vine finishes, we're not gonna rush her. But I do know we want to try to get to the fun part, which will be the 6 o'clock where we start to allocate funds. If anybody comes in and has any questions about any of it, it's a rolling time frame. Anybody can comment, come up and take a look at these, and we can share more information. So what I wanted to state, I guess, starting was, what's your feedback? What do some of you think so far? What did you like, not like? What did you see that you maybe didn't know? Any initial feedback from when you look at some of the projects? What were your thoughts for those of you that are here?
That's it.
That's fine. That's fair. That's fair. And that's fine. That's fair. So basically what we need right now is more time. More time to review it, more time to chew on it, right? On the actual capital improvement part. Yes. Was there a hand? Yes, sir.
I would just suggest it would be helpful to have the map, so a little bit more clarity on the map, right? And maybe you do a color coding to really incorporate the area, because I know the lines refer to lines, right?
Mhm.
But what does that line impact? It's just kind of my thought as I was looking at that,
Certainly.
you know.
And I think
Affect
maybe
neighborhood.
by description, we could maybe line out what each zone is to what the borders are. Everybody has a general idea. Again, we're going this off of this based off of 2016 study. So we're finally taking this plan off the shelf and you know, putting it to terms. And obviously our review of it is going to be much more dense and deeper than anybody who's going to take 5-10 minutes to look at it. We want you to understand that this is difficult for you. Also be very challenging for us as we deal on top of this, on top of our day-to-day. However, the great part about it is I have some data to share with you on some of the zones. All right, particularly on the zones and then the water zone. So that was the color-coded map that you guys saw. Okay. So we're gonna need some thoughts on this. So first question that I have is, was everybody here able to identify which zone is theirs or which area is theirs?
I really didn't know.
That's, you're in the same zone. So for the most part, everybody was able to see which zone pertained to them. Collectively, yes, for the most part, okay. But everybody at least has a chance to see their zone. So you know that if I say zone 7, you know if that's yours or not. Right? If I say, so what zone is everybody for the most part here? Because I did not know what zone anybody was. Which one? 9 is yours?
Okay, we're gonna ask Laura.
Yeah.
That's fine.
It's not.
Yeah. One is 9.
West Lawn is 9.
This could be, you know,
Okay. I thought I had you guys as 8. Isn't that 8? Isn't that what West London is?
We're below Cedar.
Mhm.
Oh, maybe, did I say eight?
That's 8. Isn't it?
Oh,
Well, that's 9.
that's nine.
Here by 1 and 8. Okay,
Is it in this westward?
that is late.
That's
Mhm.
westward.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're at 9.
Mhm.
All right, Dave, could you look at that just to make sure? All right, so as we're doing that, and the reason why that's important as we're looking at the zones, we want to talk about some questions that were asked is which zones are different, better, and or worse. All right, so we talked about districts. So in the study that was done in 2016, there was what's called priority 1 and priority 2. Okay, for the most part, they separated them in priority 1, priority 2. Much lower would have been priority 3 or whatever else. Okay. And then we looked at how many priority 1 leaks existed per zone. So in zone 1, and actually, if you can, Kyle, can you share that the spreadsheet? The one sheet 1, the one with the first option, so we look at it. It's a very preliminary sheet that we put together. And it'll be easier to see. You can blow that up a little bit. All right, there you go, perfect. As you notice, we did not put a whole lot of effort in 12 through 15. There's way too much uncounted. This is by zone. If you notice, zone 1, we've recorded, and these are just the ones that we have data today. 125 leaks in zone 1, 142 in zone 2, and 104 in zone 7. Those are ones that we have data right now. That I can tell you right now. That's not to say that other zones have more leaks now. These are leaks that have been repaired. Rick, I know you're still on the call. One of the questions that came up was, how long ago have we been tracking these numbers of leaks per zone? Should have asked, are we unmuted? You're unmuted. Oh, thank you. Could you let Rick know if he can? All right, so while we get that response, skip the original cost and the percentages. Let's go to priority 1s. Priority 1s encompass how many what were considered priority 1 leaks existed per zone. So in zone 1 or area 1, there were 8 priority 1 listed. Okay, yes,
I'm a visual person, right?
sure.
That's hard to. What zone incorporates all 4 districts?
Well, according to what we have, the way zone 1 is split, because of where it is, there is a parcel of area 1 that falls into all 4 districts. Very small, very, very small. I'm talking about a couple of streets, but according to the latest redistricting, there's one that technically affects all 4, according to what we looked on the map. But hold that thought. Go back to priority 1s. If you notice down to zone 6, right? It had 10. Remember, we told you that we addressed a couple of streets. That's the zone that we did a couple of streets in already. So it was 10. Now we've dropped that to 8. Because a lot of those priority 1s were part of what was done. So that's something that already occurred. Okay, that's already happened. So that's why it shows 10, but now it shows 8. Right? Then, no. Those were 3 streets that were actually done correctly. And it's 3, and I'd say 3.5. 3 and it's 3.5 is the actual number. Actual real work that was done. Yeah, so 3.5 streets were done in that, and it addressed 2 out of those 10 priority 1 leaks. Okay, that was in that zone. Then we talk about equity, right? And it's a tough decision to be in, because as we sit up here, we incorporate everything that's being said from all the districts. Because we want to make sure that everybody's affected and everybody's helped in some way, shape, or form. As you mentioned, all these wastewater things affect everybody, right? They affect all the zones. The manholes, the lift stations, they affect everybody. There's a particular drainage project that's going on that we hope to put out the bid soon, which will be in that West Lawn, that Mary Melody area. Well, that doesn't affect everybody, right? That's only affects one group. And those are different from the two. Now we start.
That's already funded. Right, but what I'm saying is we talk about equity. So now we're in the great luck and a great place that we now have some funding to move things forward. Which is what the 6 o'clock meeting will be about, specifically to that. Okay? Now, for the $4 million that we have in mind to actually offset, the question is, how do we spend it and how is it equitable? There's not very many, so no matter what we do, unless we are very, very careful how we kind of jump around, will it, affect everybody? Unless we pick zone 1, right? If we pick zone 1, then yeah, technically everybody will technically, right? Everybody will be affected in some way, shape, or form. Could you show the other one that had a 40%? You had a question?
What do you consider, priority?
It's not us considering it, it's part of the 2016 study that was done. 2016 study that was done separated into 2. I don't know where that threshold is, it wasn't very clear the way that study was done. All it shows is it shows some higher priorities. Then can you speak kind of that, what they base priority 1 versus priority 2?
Yes, so, the priority based on the in that general area. There are certain lines that have priority because of the number of leaks or what they've noticed, than the others. Problem is, they're all kind of lumped together. In this report up here, you can kind of see there's a differentiate. And the red is high priority, and the maroon is secondary priority 2. The priority 1 and priority 2. So the problem with these type of report is, you hate to do one, when you work in one area, you want to just fix the whole area and not come back and just do a certain line and leave the other lines in place. What you want to do is just fix the whole area and move on to the next area. Fix the whole area. If not, you're coming back later, disturbing the neighborhood again and redoing some of the same line. There's a lot of inefficiencies in that. So what we're recommending is, if you're gonna work on an area, fix priority 1 and 2, and not just one area. Not just priority 1 and not 2.
It's the financially responsible way to do it, as long as you're not postponing the crisis management.
That's correct.
And that's where we stand. And that's what the tough part of the study is because if you do just focus on all priority 1s from all different zones, well, what you end up doing is you end up piecemealing it. And you're tearing up parts and pieces of a neighborhood. And since some parts will have a certain better piping and some won't. Until when, right? Until then, as you said, it becomes critical mass for them. But I wanted to call your attention to this table, and I'm going to try to do it from here as best as I can. So now we start talking about into the portion that we're going to get into shortly for more thought, because this is where the thought comes in. Right now, if we were to do a sum of all these projects, you have different factors to take into account, right? You have the original cost, which original cost shows what we believe based on when the study was done back in 2016 that we thought that it was going to cost to fix these zones. We're only going to focus on 1 through 8 and number 11. All right, 1 through 8 plus 11. That's all we're going to focus on. As we're doing that, you'll notice what it costs to do just about each zone, at least when this was done.
And those are prices back in
2016. That's what original cost. That's what we wanted to talk about. So if you notice, let's look at, for example, zone 11 up there, which is the least expensive out of all those. Back then, it was estimated that it would cost $894,000 to fix that zone. So on the map, it was thought to be zone 11. So if you look at where all these zones are, zone 11 would have cost that much. Okay. Problem is life happened between 2016 and now. A lot of things happened. All right. Cost, demands, supply, COVID, shortfalls, you name it. The number that's shown next to that column is what the 40% inflation number would have been. So that project that back then cost $894 is now projected to be somewhere close to 1.25 just for that area. Now, Den has got some thoughts as to where he thinks that number might either be lower or maybe that was overly inflated or whatnot. We firmly believe we might be somewhere between that line and the 15% line. Didn't you want to talk about that?
Yes, sir, with. So what we estimated based on the national, inflation rate, since 2016, compounding it year by year, we're estimating approximately a 30 to 35% increase from the 2016 number. But that cost, if you did it last month, it would have been much higher because there's so much work out there. There was so much work out there when the interest rate is low. Everyone, all the contractors were busy. And the bids that we were getting from contractor was substantially higher, even year to year, was almost 20, 25, 30% higher. So there is a little bit of correction now, because of the high interest rate. There's less, we're starting to see prices come down because the construction is not as prevalent as it was. Not text out there, always. Ignore them. But the commercial, the utility contractor that was building all these subdivisions at 7-8% interest rate, starting to come down. There's just not as much work out there. And it's a supply and demand. But that doesn't mean by the time we get this, it's gonna come back. It varies.
Yes, sir.
To be clear, right now, this chart up here, we're discussing costs associated with the water transmission line
Yes, sir.
only.
Only
And that is,
our blue water.
that is the
Incoming.
8-inch, 6-inch, which are the 8-inch? or 6-inch?
This is only the 2-inch. This is only a 2-inch water line. We're not talking about anything else going on except for the 2-inch water lines. That's all we're talking about right now, because we've identified through this study that was the greatest amount of need first. And back to what we talked about when we first started, we're gonna work backwards. We're gonna work from our connection point to your homes backwards.
Like from the water meter to the house or from the street to the house?
It would be from the meter to us to that next connection point. All right, so that's where we stand now. All right, that's where we are now in present time. So we firmly believe we're somewhere between that 15 to 40% number. Where we lie will depend on when we do this. We've, in a sense, because of the interest rates going up, we may have lucked out on some of these costs, as Denver was mentioning, where some of them may have gone down. But one thing we do know is it's going to continue going up and down as we go. One thing is constant, it's probably never going to go down to that original cost. Okay, and as time progresses, it's going to eventually keep going. No matter what you look at inflation rates, where they go up and down year per year, it's always at an upward incline. So the sooner we act, the sooner we'll have a better idea of what we can do. Because whatever we choose to do will be dependent on the dollars that we choose to express. All right, today, later in just a few minutes, we're going to be happy to start attacking which one. But I want you to do me a favor. I want you to forget about dollars right now. Kyle, do me a favor. Could you hide columns C, D, and E for a second? Let's hide those. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the number, and we don't have the data for all of them, okay? I started the meeting by telling you guys, we haven't had the best of data collection. All right, we haven't. I can't be more open with you than that. There's been leaks galore in the Marque for years. Those of you that lived here a long time know that we've been talking about leaks in the city for a very long time. Here's what we do have. Rick, do you know how long these leaks are from? Is Rick on now? I know he was on a second ago.
Yes, I'm here. I've been on.
These leaks that we have, can you tell us approximately when they're from?
This is leak data from work orders over the last 3 to 4 years.
Okay. So rough math shows you there that in the last 3 or 4 years, only in these 3 zones attached, we've got, what does that say? Roughly 370. Is my math about right? About 370, give or take, off 369. All right. We got 369 leaks addressed in just those 3 zones. Okay. Knowing that, now looking at priority 1 leaks, these are leaks that were looked at to be the ones in greatest need based on the study done back in 2016. Whatever data they had that they did the study with, that they produced this stuff with, it shows that the worst three are, and just in order from top to bottom, 7, 8, 5. Put the next one down. 10, is that, am I still looking at that right? Kyle, do me a favor, highlight row 8. Just highlight any color you want. Just shade it whatever color you want. Highlight 8, 9, 10. And then 12. Excuse me, not 12, I'm sorry, 5, row 5. Okay, so those show, according to the data that was shared with us, the highest zones for priority ones. Okay, of those, the highest of all of them was 7.
Hey. So one more question, and I want to make sure
Yeah, go ahead, Rick. Rick, are you there?
He muted himself.
So, as we look at this, everybody, we notice that according to the data that was supplied, that's the order. You would argue that zone 7 is the highest priority because back then they had 14 priority ones. Okay, according to the data that was supplied to us. According to our data that we have so far, zone 2 is the worst.
Caesar?
Yes.
Hi, I was obtaining some confirmation here. So the data that we're looking at is from 2017.
Sorry.
And so the data that we're looking at here is from 2017. That's when we started being able to track leaks a little bit through the MyGov system. And then one tidbit of information that I can share with the group is this year we've categorized about 81 mainline leaks. Okay, so these are leaks 2-inch and above, which are all considered mains. We've had 81 leaks in 2022. 60 of those, or 50 of those, 60% of those have been on 2-inch water lines. So the majority of our leaks that we have on main lines is the 2-inch lines. And we don't have that historical information prior to this year because the data just wasn't captured, unfortunately, but we do capture mainline leaks versus service line leaks. Once again, on these leak counts here, those are not necessarily all mainline leaks. We repair more service line leaks than we do mainline leaks. We've had almost 1,100 leaks this year. 81 of those have been main lines. We have extremely high amount of service line leaks. So the service lines come off of all sizes of mains, 2, 6, 8, 12s. And we're trying to capture that data a little bit better than what we've done in the past. But when we're looking at these leak counts, I just want to make sure there's some clarity there that based on the data that we have to work from, a leak is a leak is a leak. But there is a big difference between a main line leaking, which is a distribution line 2-inch and bigger, versus service lines that the city's responsible for. We're responsible for the service line from the main to the meter. We repair a lot of those type of leaks. And that's the majority of the leaks that we have is service line leaks off of various mains. When we put in new water mains, whether it's 2-inch, 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch mains, we will replace service lines. That will be always part of that project. Now, we're only going to replace the service line from the main to the meter. The remaining service line from the house to the meter is a private property issue. So I just wanted to add some clarity on these counts and the data that we're looking at here. Based on the 2016 study, which is what we're using to review with the group tonight, and what we've looked at internally, both engineering wise and from a public works standpoint, is that study, which was a very robust study done, really pointed us in the direction that these 2-inch water lines are creating a lot of water loss issues. And then, as you brought up earlier in the discussion, it also creates the need for us to put manpower out on the street to flush those water lines, some of which are very difficult to flush, but we end up dumping more water out of the system trying to clean up these 2-inch water lines that are just a problem. And so that's why we're really looking at these 2-inch water lines in the city, to get rid of them and put in larger lines, provide fire protection, et cetera, et cetera.
I have a question about that, if you don't mind. I mean, you say a leak is a leak is a leak, and yeah, but a fix is not necessarily a fix. So if you're fixing a 2-inch line that goes from close to the street up to, say, for instance, my meter, you're digging a little trench through the yard and changing out a 2-inch pipe. If you're fixing mains, are you digging up curbs and concrete and asphalt? That's something that we need to know, what type of fixes are assigned to these different priorities. If we're supposed to decide, like in our neighborhood, should we do it all together, or should we do one later and do one now? So for instance, in my neighborhood, I'd be saying, if you're gonna keep Mary Lane from flooding 2 feet deep in the next bad storm, as opposed to waiting to fix a little trench and fix a little 2-inch line, that little 2-inch line can wait to get the drainage done, because those houses don't need to be flooded. But if you're talking about digging up the entire street twice, 2 different months apart, but 2 months, I might be willing to risk a 2-month wait. If it's a 6-month or a 10-month wait to get into flood season and hurricane season again next year, well, that's a different story. So we need a whole lot more detail, and this is priority one, and this is what this project is, because we don't know what's involved in fixing this stuff.
Well, and to be honest with you, we know somewhat what's involved, just based on where the water lines are located, but typically main lines in the city of Lamarck, the majority of our main lines are actually running back of curb. However, they tend to cross streets. So if we're replacing main water lines, and generally I'd be talking the bigger ones here, the 6, 8s, and 12s, we're going to end up doing some street work. But even on a 2-inch water line, it's likely that it's going to tie into a 6-inch main or an 8-inch main on either side, because these 2-inch water lines are generally running down an easement, which is behind property in a rear easement. And that's another problematic with these 2-inch water lines, because they're hard to access. And keep in mind that the majority of our calls on water leaks are not found by staff. The majority of water leaks are found by the public. We do not know when a line is leaking. So it takes somebody to see water flowing. They give us a call, we go out and investigate it, and we determine that there's a leak there. But these 2-inch water lines, because of where a lot of them are located, it's very hard for anybody to even notice that there's a leak possibly back there, because it's not blowing a lot of water. When we lose a large water main, like a 12-inch water main, we know it. And so does a lot of people, because it causes a system pressure loss on our system. And so the reactionary time on these bigger mains is a lot different than it is on these 2-inch water lines. But when we get into design phase on designing these water lines is when we start taking a look at, the overall cost. These are all estimates that we're looking on based on where these water lines are located. And once the engineering work gets done and we look at any improvements we need to make that maybe wasn't thought of during the preliminary review, those costs may change. And because it's important that we tie these systems in right, we make sure we got enough valves, fire hydrants, et cetera, when we're constructing new water lines. And all that's kind of thought of from a preliminary standpoint, but until you actually get approval to move forward with the project and actually do a set of design plans, nothing's, I guess, written in stone.
And my apologies for not properly introducing. That is Rick Seiler, he's our Public Works Director. He's out of the office, but he's made it a point to make sure he could join.
I do want to address the Western drainage project. We're on a hard schedule to get that grant that's gonna expire. I think we've almost exceeded the allowable extension date. So that project has to go. And the water line project will have to come after, it may be 6-8 months after or a year if funding is available. When funding is available. But
If it's recommended at this time.
yeah, but the priority is getting that drainage done, because if not, we'll lose that funding and it's gone.
I'm just
Yeah.
using that art because I'm familiar, and I'm just using this as an example. That translates to every neighborhood and every zone, and every project. Because if you want the community to say, well, but the community recommended this and they all agree, unless we know what we're really talking about and what's really wrong, we'll do enough of a rubber stamp on a recommendation, and we don't want to do that.
No,
And from what I've heard, that's not what you want.
no, it's not what we want. We want to get priorities listed based on need. And based on need by how we know it. But as Rick mentioned, most of the leaks are being pointed out by the residents. Because we're busy fixing leaks. We don't have enough time to go out there and canvas and do that. One thing has been constant. From the 2016 study to now, one thing is proved to be accurate, especially since we're going back to 2017, is one thing is prevalent. Most of these leaks are happening on these 2-inch lines. That's the number one.
Good news, they usually fix them in 6 or 8 or 2 inch.
I mean, at this point,
Fix
There's
it.
80 million.
You don't wanna fix the lines, you wanna fix it.
Fix the system.
Fix
Right.
it, just stop gap for more.
But again, asking us to walk around and look at all of these and make a competent recommendation. A whole lot of knowledge.
Well-
for a bunch of people, most of us aren't engineers as far as I know.
true.
We'll give it a good shot. We're just looking for all the
Well,
information.
Ideally to do that, as much information as we currently have due to the lack of data collection up until this point. The toughest part has been having the data that's accurate enough to be able to report. The only thing that's been consistent is we're just trying to cover up leaks. But to that point, you mentioned it earlier. You plug a hole here down the line. I mean, if we go out there and repair a leak in one certain area, we'll get in there, we'll replace what, 20, 25 feet, right? Maybe 50 feet at a time. We'll go in there and we'll try to replace it. Because you go in there, you try to do the best, most diligent work you can. And then who knows how long, not too long thereafter, we're in there in the same line replacing it because the leak just moved on down the line.
So if I can interject one
Please.
comment, not to, I just for clarity, when we fix water lines, our clamps we use either 7.5-inch clamps or 12-inch clamps. So effectively what we're doing right now is we're replacing these water lines a foot at a time. Because every time we go out there, we got to dig, we get down, we find a break, we find a hole, and we put a clamp on it. And that clamp, like I said, our smaller clamps are 7.5 inches long. The other ones are 12 inches long. And we just ordered 24 more 12-inch, 2-inch clamps to fix 2-inch water lines. It takes a lot more work and a lot more planning in order to replace a larger section of pipe. We've given direction to staff that if we dig down and we find existing clamps on that line, we're going to replace a section of pipe rather than just putting a clamp next to a clamp, which has been done in the past. So you got a clamp, and a clamp. Kind of crazy. So the idea is to actually take out a 5-foot section of pipe, maybe 10 foot as Mr. Garcia is referring to, and replace a section of pipe. But that doesn't guarantee that it's not going to, you're still not going to get another hole 5 feet from your last repair. It's just the nature of that pipe is deteriorating.
Well, as far as replacing the incoming water line, it makes absolute sense to me, and it seems to be just common sense that the way you have it lined up is the best reasonable way to do your priorities. Where are the worst leaks? Do that zone first, and then move to the next worst, most severe, and do that whole zone next. I mean, that just seems like a reasonable way to do it. As far as fixing the water lines, that makes absolute sense to me. You sat in office for 42 years, but hey, it still makes absolute sense. You know.
All right,
It's still common sense.
Kyle, do me a favor, pull up the map real quick, up there, the color coded map that we have. I'd like to, Kyle is our assistant administrator, he's playing our Vanna White tonight. I made the Vanna White comment to my kids the other day, and they looked at me like, they didn't know who it was. I know, right? It's sad, I feel like we need to watch reruns for them to understand that that's a very important part of our lives. Yes, could you zoom that a little bit? Focus on the other colors if you can, because as we noted before, the other zones 13, 14, and 15, thankfully, they're not as bad as some of the others, right? So we're gonna focus the next portion of this conversation because we're gonna narrow down this component. So Kyle, I know you gotta go offline here for a second to technically close this meeting, open the next one, because here comes the fun part. You get to recommend allocations based on what we're telling you. Okay, specifically on fixing our water lines. What we've done to be conservative is we've looked at the numbers that we shared with you for the 15%.
Are we switching the?
Yeah, we'll switch to the other one. So as he's doing the switch, thank you, everybody. See you in about 30 seconds. So as Kyle